In this movie, we're going to take a look at the repeat grid functionality in Illustrator and see how you can use it to create a repeat pattern mockup based on your vector artwork. This is best shown, so let's get started. For me, the process always starts with drawing. So these are just simple thumbnail drawings. I want to create kind of a scallop type of repeat pattern. If you think of fish scales, that'd be a good example of it. And so I'm just kind of figure out the motif I'm going to use for that. And I think I'm going to go with the top middle one here. And the first thing I do is I want to set up a grid I can base my pattern off of. Not necessarily it needs to be this size when I actually use the pattern, but it's going to be easier to build it at this size. And so I just use elliptical tool, set up a simple grid, start building on top of it. Most of these are elliptical shapes, but one aspect based off of the drawing I showed is I want to have kind of a row of dots or circular shapes that kind of arch over the top of this motif. And so the easiest way to create that is to use a dotted line. So if I go ahead and turn on this layer, we've offset the path a little bit to create the line we're going to use. But one thing I want to point out is I have some default things that just load into Illustrator. So if I drag graphic styles over here, you can see I have this path selected, and this is a 1 point if you look at the strokes, but I also have a 0.75, a 0.5, and a 0.25, because if I ever zoom in to build something just so I can see it better, 0.25 is what I'm going to use. I wouldn't want to use a 1 point, it's just too fat. If I have a drawing I've placed in, I'm building off of that, it would block too much. So that's one reason why I have all these custom graphic styles that preload with a new file. I also have a couple of them. Actually, let's go and zoom in so you can see this a little better. I have a couple more. One of them here is a dotted line. So, or a dash line, that is. And if you're doing a coupon, for example, and you use a dash line, this would be something you'd want to use. But notice there's these two settings over here. I'm not sure why Illustrator left this one in, because this is all it used to have, the one that it defaults to. But people complain because when you apply it to a rectangle, let's do that here, look at the corners. It doesn't always align right. Like this one hits the corner, this one's has a gap on the corner, and these two just don't look that good. And so people were always complaining, can we fix that? Can we make it so it's just nice and clean? You know, and so they actually came out with an icon to represent that nice and clean. So you can take something like this and click it, and now it looks the way you would expect it to look. But they left the old functionality still in, and it defaults to it. So why? I don't know. Just get rid of the old functionality, stick with the new. But Adobe doesn't think that way, and it applies to paths too. So you always want to make sure you click that so it's applying to the path correctly. But that's a dash line. And so at times when I need it, this just gets me started really quick. I don't have to input things. I also have one for dotted. And dotted was one of the first things in Illustrator that confused me because it's unintuitive and makes no sense whatsoever why they did it this way. But after 20 years, it still doesn't make a lot of intuitive sense either, because technically it's a dashed line. It's not a dotted line. And once again, it defaults to the bad one, so always click on the good one. Because if you use this one, notice how on this path, it starts right in the middle of this circle, and then you get to the bottom, the end dot, and it's not. Where if you click on this, it centers everything properly, and that's going to come into play as we build it. So let's go ahead and jump back on our motif. I just wanted to kind of share that with you about graphic styles in general. We'll go ahead and zoom in so you can see this a little better. I'll select this path, and I'm going to cheat by starting with applying my dotted line. And once again, it's just selecting a dash line. Make sure you click the right one, and I'm not going to do that yet because I want to have you see it larger. All the difference between a dash line and a dotted line, here's a dash line. Let's go ahead and just set that up. Here's a dash line. The difference is a dotted line has no dash. This is 0 that you would punch in here, and this is what you would see. What controls the size of a dot is the size of your path. So we want these to be size 14 points will be the size of the stroke. The gap, we're going to match that to 14. And so that'll put an even space in between each one of these. And even though it's 0, you can see a little line there. That's because this is actually still a dash. It just has no length. So it's just squashed. So what we're going to tell Illustrator, and this is where the unintuitive aspect of this comes in, we're going to take a stroke that has no length, and we're going to give it a round cap on each side that has no length in between, and thus create a circle. This is what I couldn't figure out 20 years ago when I was hired to do a poster for Adobe, and at the time I was using freehand full-time, not Illustrator. And I had to build and be baptized by fire in a week to get up to speed on how to use Illustrator. And I couldn't figure this out. Ultimately, I went back to freehand and copied and pasted into Illustrator, but don't tell them that, to get the dotted line. Now, maybe you've struggled with this at times. But notice, once again, it defaults to the old method. I wish they'd just get rid of that. Just get rid of it. Nobody likes this, so why keep it in? You know, it just confuses people, and why default to it? That doesn't make any sense either. So if you select the path, notice it starts in the middle of this circle. Over here, it's not. And at top, this anchor point, which should be centered, whether it's in a gap or on a circle, but it's not. So if we click this, all of that will improve. Everything will be centered, so you make sure you want to do that. Once you have it visually the way you want, ultimately we need to turn this into a stroke, so we need to expand it. So we're going to select it, go to Object, and we're going to go here to Expand. Let's do that again. Expand like this. The Expand panel will come up. Yes on everything. Click OK, and it'll expand it. If you go over your tool palette, there's this little arrow, so you can switch between a fill and a stroke just by clicking that. That saves you a little time. And now we have what we want to kind of wrap around that top edge. So I think that's going to work. Let's go back to layers now. Now, after adding that level of detail, you know, I really like it. So I just trim the artwork from this stage to this stage. That's why I created the grid originally, so I could also use those shapes to edit and get the artwork pushed to what I want. This will be the entire scallop shape. Now, it's usually at this point, I usually set a project aside and decide if this is what I want to move forward with, or I'll come back to it with fresh eyes. And in this case, I did that, and I looked at it, and it's okay, but I thought the gaps here and the gaps in the center here were too thin by the time, because I want to beef up this line a little bit, because those will actually not be printed. Those will be the negative space in between the color shapes that make up the final pattern. So I think I got a little tight there. I also don't like this area, so I needed to rework that. So that kind of self-art direction is really important in design, or in illustration for that matter. And I'm going to turn this on to show you how I changed it. So this is what it was. The next day, came back, looked at it, and go, yeah, I need to edit that. So I changed it to this. And I think this is going to work a lot better for our final design. Now, one thing that kind of bugged me, and I'll go ahead and zoom in on this, is if I go ahead and select these elements that make up the circles here, notice, especially on the end ones, it just adds all these extra anchor points you really don't need, and it adds extra anchor points on other ones. And I really, 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 really don't like that. So what I'm going to do, and what I did, is I replaced all these. Now that I know it's in position, it's the size I want, it's just not clean, and I like building clean art. I'll go into isolation mode. I'll just copy one of these out, paste them in place like that. I'll go to the ellipse tool, create a perfect circle, a little smaller, select both, focus on the big one, and then I'll go to alignment and just align it to the center. Select the small one, size it up until it snaps. I have Smart Guides turned on, Command U. I'm going to cut this to the clipboard, select the one with all the anchor points we don't want, delete it, and just paste in front. So that's what I did for all of them because I'm obsessive that way and I don't want it to be dirty art. So I'm going to click on the clean art, and that's what all of these have been set up. So they're perfect circles. I know I'm not going to run into weird kind of redundant anchor points. And by the way, if you're not sure what redundant anchor points are, as you shape build, if you use Pathfinder a lot, you'll notice at times certain shapes, like at a corner of a shape, it might have two anchors there and you can't see it because they're piggybacking directly on top of one another. Even though Pathfinder, if you go to their option menu and go to Pathfinder options, they have this feature where you can click on to remove redundant points and click OK, but it still happens. So it doesn't even work fully. That's a common problem in Illustrator with shape building. Now, on this design, I do like the way it looks. I think we need to beef up this line work a little more. Right now, I believe it's 2. Yeah, I think I want to beef it up. We're going to go up to 3.5 like that. And it's always smart to do rounded corners on a design like that. I think it's going to look better. So I think that's going to work. Now all it comes down to is we need to expand all of this. So this is where I would expand it and clean it up. I'm not going to walk through that process, but I'll show you something, what I mean. So if we go to expand, it'll expand all of these into actual shapes. So if you go to keyline view, you can see their actual fills, no strokes anymore. And then I would start uniting all the shapes together to form the final art. And if I turn this layer on, that's exactly what I've done here. So what I end up with is a background shape, and then all the shapes on top of it are just islands of white. And these are the ones I'm going to color. I usually don't spend time kind of walking through all that because that's just craftsmanship and production. But maybe I'll do a movie where I go into more detail about that. But what I want to do is I want to zoom in on this because this is one part about design that I think is really important, is that vector art comes to a sharp edge when you create. And sometimes that's intended and you want that. Other times things are going to look more buttoned up if you add subtle curves or subtle rounds to different shapes. So here's unrounded, here's with subtle rounds. Actually, let's do this first. Let's go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and select the black here. That's another thing I don't like. At certain zoom ratio, it's hard to select things without selecting other things. So we're going to take all these shapes and we're just going to fill them with black. We'll get rid of this background shape here. Let's go ahead and zoom in again because it's important to show you this. So here's all these shapes. They come to a dagger sharp edge. You know, don't look too close. You'll poke your eye out. And I always like to go in and add subtle rounds to all these shapes. So if we compare it, you can see I've added little subtle rounds that I think make it look more custom and more crafted. I also made a decision to add some circles in these interior shapes down here, which I like as well. So always improving stuff as I go on. If I see something I think it's going to improve a design, I add to it. So subtle rounding, not hard. You have the rounding tool in Illustrator. So if you click on a corner, you can subtly round it like that. That's great. I tend to use a plugin because it existed 6 years before Adobe ripped it off and put it in Illustrator. I'm not going to get into that, but that is the fact. It's called Dynamic Corners. It's an absolutely brilliant plugin by Astute Graphics out of England. And the reason why I like it is you don't have to select an anchor point. You go to anything that can be rounded and you just pull it and round it. If you like that, you can apply it to the next round, apply it to the next corner, to the next corner, and it really saves time. It's a lot more intuitive than how Adobe decided to implement their own. So you might want to check them out. I'll be showing other plugins I use by Astute Graphics in my content that I share on my YouTube channel, because it's ones that I use every day in my own studio to do my own projects, and it really does save time. It actually pays for itself. So anyway, subtle rounds, a good habit to get into. Let's go ahead, go to the coloring. I like to experiment with color, figure out what color palette I want to use. I think we're going to focus on the one in the bottom here. So all I'm going to do, and I usually, see, I'm used to working freehand for 15 years, and in freehand you could drag color swatches out of the swatches palette onto the artboard, and you could figure out a tonal family, much like is shown down here, which is vector shapes. I still kind of do that. I pull out vector shapes. I actually have a script when I create a new document that will create a grid like this that I can use for that. So it's just something I've kind of developed a habit for over the years and stuck with it. And it's a good creative habit. So we're just going to select some of these and start coloring and see how we want to apply the color here. Color exploration is very kind of personal. So whatever colors you prefer. I wanted these since this is kind of a feminine type of design, especially with the colors. And the name I'm going to give it represents a peacock, but it's the French word for peacock. I kind of want it to be flamboyant like that, but still kind of have the colors be, I don't know, earth tone, I guess. Not exactly earth tone, just kind of muted. I don't want oversaturated colors, I guess. And we're just going to apply colors. I try to balance it so I don't get one color next to another color. So maybe we'll color all these that orange, so it's more of an accent. And all these, I think that color. Doing color like this, I usually, when I'm working like this and I'm not doing conceptual work, I can't do it if I'm doing conceptual work. I'll listen to like an audiobook or whatever. I think that looks pretty good. So now that we have our colors established, I think I'm going to build it using this color scheme, although I really like the top left too. We're going to use the new feature in Illustrator called Repeat Grid. And it's important to just jump into it and show you, well, I'll just show you as I show you. Let's just do that. I'm going to go to Object. I'm going to go to Repeat, and we're going to go to Grid. So all you have to do is have your art selected. Go here, select it. It'll immediately start repeating your artwork across like this. Now, this is just a simple, simple grid of elements like this. This isn't necessarily your final repeat, because you're going to have to make some adjustments. Let's go here and open up properties, because on the properties panel, there are things that are going to come up. Let's go ahead and close this here. On the properties panel, you have some controls for your repeat down here that will show up here. And much like the pattern tool, it's using some of the same grid types. So this one is grid, the next one is brick by row, and brick by column. So it only has 3 of the tile types. In the pattern tool, there's more that you can choose from. Hex by row, hex by column, I think is what they're called. So it's kind of limited in that respect. But here, we don't want a regular grid, because these are just stacked. We need to offset it so the bottom kind of aligns to the gap between the 2 below it. So we're going to go brick by row here. And now it's aligning the way we want. The way you can control it, we want to move these down is you use the controller on the left of this repeat grid controller, and you can move these up like this. And that's the other thing here, is it is all kind of, you can use specific numbers here, but it goes a lot faster if you're just eyeballing it like this. So if I thought the tolerance needed to be something specific, I could punch that in here. So maybe I thought, let's try 63. You know, you can do it that way as well. And actually, that does look pretty good. So I'll just leave it at 63. And then maybe on this one, let's do 2 since we had 1.93 like that. And I think that looks pretty good. So that's how you can adjust it side by side with the top. You can adjust it vertically using the control on the left side, and the top side control does it horizontally, going horizontal between the elements and adding size there. If you want to size the whole grid down, just go to a corner, just like a bounding box, and you can scale it down like that. Or you can take this right controller and expand it out this way. Now, there's a few things you need to keep in mind if you're going to use this feature, and that is it's great for mocking up a pattern like this. But once you have this, you've seen this in another movie on my YouTube channel where you can use the pattern tool in Illustrator. You can fill a shape, add multiple fills to a shape, and then drag and drop that into the graphic styles to use later. But on this one, if we drag and drop into graphic styles, it's not gonna handle it right. And what it does is it destroys the grid control now. So now it's just a regular masked shape of object. So if I Command Z, and notice down here, this has the little nope, not going to work kind of icon on it. So we're going to Command Z. We're going to go back to our grid repeat because we don't want to destroy it quite yet. So you can't make a graphic style out of it. The other thing is there is no pattern swatch that you can export. I thought when I first used this, I was looking for like a little checkbox where it says create pattern swatch from grid. Like it would just automatically create it and put it in your swatches. Nope, that's not in here. So all this really is a mock-up of a pattern. It doesn't actually allow you to create a resource that you can use over and over again, which is kind of short-sighted in my opinion. I don't know why they did it this way. And this is the part about Adobe that kind of frustrates me because I think they need somebody on their team who uses Illustrator to actually create on a daily basis, who can be on their team, see these new features before they go public and say, hey, it's great that you can mock it up, but here's why you need to add create pattern swatch feature to this new functionality. Because if you wanted to share this with other people, it's going to be hard to use. And I'm going to demonstrate that now. Let's go ahead and take this and we're going to paste it behind this. Let's say we wanted to align it with something in a document where we're doing, well, yeah, you can do that in general. If we have this background shape, we can go like, we can select both of these. Oh, wait, no, you can't. That's the thing. If you have one object selected, this doesn't act, it kind of acts like an object if you select it individually, but let's say you want to align it with another object, so you click this, it'll deselect that. And you can't drag select both of them. It won't work that way. And you might be asking why. Good question. I have no idea why that is. So it doesn't act like a real object, but it's kind of acting like an object, but it really isn't. I find that just unintuitive and just really, really short-sighted on Adobe's part. Here's the other thing. I want to just select the corner of this so I can align it with my underlying object. Okay, I think that's aligned. Only to zoom in to find out, well, it doesn't really snap. The object I'm trying to align it to, that snaps. So I could take that and try to align it, but it won't snap to the repeat grid shape. Those are pretty basic functionality that Adobe just dropped the ball on when it came to this. So in reality, this feature is really good for mocking up a pattern and testing if it's going to look good. And I think this does look good, but actually using it, you would have to expand it. And once you expand it like this, you lose all of that ability to customize it, because when you expand it, this is actually just all this artwork in RAW masked within a rectangle. If I release this mask, I have that set up as an F2 key. You can see this is all it is. So this, let's go ahead and go to my graphic styles here. And we're going to go to strokes. We'll just beef this up. This was what it's masked in. So this is what it does. It just masks artwork within a shape. And you can't expand this shape by selecting the anchor points to make the fill bigger, because it doesn't have the art for that. It's really, I have no idea why they did it this way. It's like they're doing the math to a certain point to mock it up, but they weren't willing to do the math to make it really useful for a designer or a creative team who needs a pattern and needs to implement it across various things in various contexts. So kind of short-sighted, in my opinion, regarding Adobe in their development. So once again, just so you remember, if you have it in this editable format, make a copy so you can always go back to the editable format, because if you expand it, you're going to lose the editability. So if you don't mind having it expanded like that, just always keep a copy of your original. Therefore, you can go back, size it maybe a little bigger than what you need, and then expand it, and then use it in the context of whatever project you're working for. But here's a better way to handle it, in my opinion. Use this to mock up, to test stuff as you go, to make sure it's working, or you can learn how to do it from scratch, and that's what I want to show you here. So here's the exact same artwork. We're using that same principle, the bounding box I talk about in my other video on my YouTube channel, and that's this bounding box. Notice it aligns to the center of this motif, and it lines direct center right where this circular shape is, and this is how the bounding box is going to work. All we need are these two elements. Once we have those two elements with the bounding box, we'll drag and drop it into our swatches palette. We'll go ahead and double click it. Now that we're in here, we can go ahead and name this. I'm going to name this Peony Pattern, like that. And we're going to click the tile tool here. And right now it's snapping to the top. I usually don't trust it. I usually just pull it out, bring it down, snap to the top there. And what we're going to do is we're going to drag this one and snap to the right edge of that bounding box. So you can see how it's bringing this over here, and it's bringing this over here. But more importantly, we're going to leave this one the way it is, and then we'll just take this one and snap it to the bottom edge, and now it's coming in at the top. Everything's aligning the way it should for this pattern. I'll select the bounding box. We just use that to register everything. We'll get rid of it, delete it. Right now we have everything dimmed out at 15%. If you want to see what it looks like before you commit, just go to 100. That looks great. It's going to work great. I usually keep mine around 15, 20%. And now we can go back to the artboard and put it to use. We'll hit escape to get out of the pattern tool. We'll turn on this layer, and now I can select this. Now that I have the pattern swatch created, I can fill any shape. I can share this pattern swatch with other people. They can use it on a project, doesn't matter. Once I have this pattern figured out and filled, I can drag and drop it into graphic styles and create a graphic style, so it makes it even easier to use moving forward. So whatever project you have, if you want to reuse a pattern, that way we can go here and we can just drop in any pattern you want. It can be on any shape. Here's a compound shape, and we can flow it even through that. So if you learn how to create things from scratch, you don't have to depend on features that Adobe kind of half bakes and doesn't make it fully usable. So I really hope Adobe kind of changes their history of releasing new features well, like I said, that are half-baked. And the repeat grid functionality is one of them, unfortunately. It's great for mocking it up. If you want to mock something up, it works great for that, but not so great if you need to use it and use it with ease as a design resource moving forward. But it's important to remember the repeat grid functionality doesn't create an actual reusable asset, such as a pattern swatch, that you can easily apply to any other vector object, and the lack of snapping and precision when trying to align the repeat grid window with a document or other vector objects is at best unprecise and a bit frustrating. So you'll have to zoom in and just eyeball it and do the best you can. But if you use the bounding box method I showcased in this movie, and the pattern tool, you'll be able to create any type of custom repeat pattern you want, and the process will work with any version of Illustrator from CS6 or above as well. For more information on custom pattern design, watch my other movie on YouTube titled Creating a Custom Repeat Pattern. If you like this movie, please consider sharing a link to my YouTube channel and social media. I'd really appreciate that. Thank you for watching. People love process. I hope this content helps you improve your own creative process.